Tell me, Clarice, would you ever say to me, stop? If you loved me, you'd stop.
Not in 1,000 years.
Not in 1,000 years. That's my girl.
It's the Popcorn Digest with Gareth and Andy. It's the Popcorn Digest.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Popcorn Digest with myself, Gareth Green, and my co-host, Andrew Raphael.
Cardal.
So for this week's film choice, we're swapping Apocalyptic Wastelands for the Beauty of Florence, as we're discussing Ridley Scott's much-maligned sequel, Hannibal. But is this cannibal caper a banquet fit for high society, or have we bitten off more mystery meat than we can chew? Find out after the trailer.
The person I'm looking for is quite well known. He's killed 14 people that we know of.
You ever think he might come after you?
Oh, at least 30 seconds of every day. Hello?
Is this Clarice? Hello, Clarice.
Okay, so this week we're going to jump straight into, I think it's a film that doesn't need any real introduction. Everybody knows Silence of the Lambs, everybody knows Hannibal. So straight off, what did you think of Hannibal rewatching this, Andy?
It's a strange film for me because I really used to like it when I first watched it, and obviously I didn't see this at cinema because it's an 18, but I watched it on DVD very, very shortly after it came out. I always liked it because around the time this film came out, I was very much into Hannibal Lecter. I'd seen Silence of the Lambs, and this had come out, and not long after, they followed it up with Red Dragon. So around the early 2000s, it was very much a fever pitch for Hannibal Lecter related materials. So I was very much into that. And yeah, I enjoyed Hannibal a lot when I was younger. But I feel as time's gone on, the more times I watch it, the more it becomes one of my, I wouldn't say least favorite, but I definitely think that for me personally, even though Red Dragon is directed by Brett Ratner, which is bizarre in itself, I generally tend to go back to those two more than this one, because I generally find it an unsatisfying watch.
You and I find ourselves on separate sides of the river on this occasion, and the experience that you describe having with Hannibal is one that I actually have with Red Dragon. Red Dragon's a film that I used to appreciate more than I do now. Because I've actually watched through Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, and Hannibal in preparation for this episode because I'm very much a fan of the series. I always have been, much like yourself. By the time Hannibal came out, I was quite a fan of the Hannibal Lecter series, even though this particular book that it is based on was wildly bizarre compared to Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
But the experience that you have with Hannibal, this feeling of liking it the first time round, but this disconnect growing as the years go by, that's what I have with Red Dragon. Whereas with Hannibal, I've actually grown fonder of it over the years.
I mean, to be honest, I haven't actually seen Red Dragon for quite some time, so my opinion on that may change considerably. But I feel like in comparison to Silence of the Lambs, I mean, that is still the benchmark film for me, like without a doubt. And when you read the books, especially, Silence of the Lambs is almost a variation on Red Dragon, because I really enjoyed the book of Red Dragon. And Silence of the Lambs actually doesn't read quite as well for me, but it works better as a film, which is quite a testament to what they achieved with that film. I haven't actually read Hannibal, but I do know it's fairly faithful to the book apart from the ending.
Yeah, the book itself is, when I mention it as being bizarre, I would say that the first 2/3 of the book are actually quite conventional in what you would expect from a Hannibal story, and the film is very faithful to that. But yeah, they wildly diverge at the end, and the book does go... it explores some very left field ideas at the very end of that book.
Although I think what's happened with the film, because they've shied away from those left field ideas, I kind of feel it's robbed the film of its purpose. Because if you stand back and look at Hannibal, I mean, this is probably something I should be using for the conclusion, but really, this is kind of my sort of...
thesis.
Yeah, it's my thesis, really. Where when you stand back and look at Hannibal, what is its purpose? What is it doing? What is it doing to the characters? Because from my point of view, I don't feel there's very much change because they've gotten rid of those left field ideas in the ending of the book, which was obviously the purpose of the book. And in changing that ending, you're left with something that doesn't really have a purpose, at least for those two main characters. And that, I think that's another issue that really comes to mind, is that even though the main characters are the main characters, they are not the ones who are really spearheading the plot.
Well, I would say that Hannibal certainly has more of an influence over the plot than Clarice Starling. But one of the things that I will say about this film is, in terms of what you've just been through, how the character arcs are in the film, Clarice Starling, I can completely understand why Jodie Foster did not come back to this role.
Oh yeah,
I know
completely.
That originally she mentioned that it was in regards to David Mamet's script, that it had the book's ending, which she found wild and something of an undoing of Clarice Starling. And then when Steve Zalian's script came in as well, she referred to it as being too violent and didn't come back. But I also think Clarice Starling as a character, she doesn't have as flashy as a role or as much to chew on as she does in Silence of the Lambs. She's very much stoic and does what she needs to do in every occasion. That doesn't actually change. She's always rising to that challenge. But I do think that the film does place her as more of this kind of like Dante Alighieri type character who's observing the walk through hell. Whereas it's Hannibal as the one that has more to play with and more to chew on. And although, as you say, it's not a pronounced arc, he does actually change as the film goes on. The decision he makes to actually cut off his hand is one that he wouldn't have made at the beginning of the film, I do feel.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Clarice, I just feel, to be perfectly honest, like her role in the film is so peripheral at times that she may as well not be in it. They could have rewritten it and not had her in it and actually done something completely different with it. Because actually, I kept pausing it as well to find out when certain things happened in the film, because I feel like if they were going to do that, they needed to have actually brought them together a little bit sooner than they did, because what you actually get is about 20 minutes at the end.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel they just didn't do enough at the end, I think, to justify bringing them together. Or I feel that in the screenwriting process, they should have been a bit more liberal with the material if they didn't think it was working, especially taking away that ending. They should have done something else to have either improved the geography or something to bring it together a bit more, because it does feel awfully disjointed, and a lot of it feels like a preamble to those last 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And when you actually get to those last 20 minutes, I'm not sure it does enough to justify bringing them together, because I don't feel like it says anything, or at least doesn't really say enough to me about bringing those two together.
I don't know.
Because they've jettisoned those ideas, what you're left with is a pale reflection of what the book is.
See, I mean, I know that Anthony Hopkins does agree with you. He says that the version of the book, the ending of the book, is his preferred version, and that was his preferred ending to that script, with them taking Clarice away. But I in regards to that, I understand in story sense, it would make a more pronounced arc for both characters by having that ending in place. It certainly plays more in subtlety with this version, although Ridley Scott isn't a person for subtlety all that often. But I will say, Hannibal, in relation to Silence of the Lambs, it does something that I think is the right thing to do. And one of the things that you've already mentioned yourself is that it pales in comparison to Silence of the Lambs. And I do agree with you. I think Silence of the Lambs is a magnificent, it's a masterpiece thriller. It's one of the greatest, if not the greatest thrillers put to screen. Whereas I think Hannibal does the right thing, where a decision was made that they're not going to try and recapture what Silence of the Lambs did. They're not going to have the centerpiece villain that Hannibal's going to help them capture, as he has done for the last two books as well, the last two films.
Yeah.
I guess at that point, it would have been a Manhunter as well with Brian Cox. And it instead does something wildly different that challenges the conventions that are already set up by the genre. And I do feel like some of that disjointedness, it does come from that in terms of the new ground that they are exploring for the series. And I agree that as a thriller, it doesn't work. But I don't think that the thriller element is its most prominent element. That isn't what they're going for with this film. It's always felt more like a dark fairy tale, a dark romance to me.
Yeah, but at the same time, I just don't think the romance works. I just don't think there's enough substance there. There's loads from Hannibal's side, but I just feel like Julianne Moore is given next to nothing to work with in order to fuel her side. Because I feel like the way they've done her character is that, yeah, she's very stoic and guarded and doesn't really open up much. It's a very different iteration of the character that they had in Silence of the Lambs. I think for me, that's the part of the film that works the least for me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the other sections of the film are just far stronger and completely overshadow it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of strange considering how that was one of the main elements of the previous film. It's kind of a testament to how great the sort of Clarice element was in Silence of the Lambs to how everything else completely overshadows it in Hannibal. Like I just feel all the stuff in Florence and all the stuff with Mason Verger is so much more interesting than the stuff that's going on with Clarice and the FBI. Even down to the sort of peripheral FBI characters. I mean, bar Ray Liotta, all the other characters are just very stock for me.
I would say that, yes, I do agree that the Florence section is probably it's not probably, it is the strongest section of the film. I also do really love the last 20 minutes myself, to be honest. But one thing that I will say is, talking about the supporting characters in the Clarice Starling section of the film, I would also say that comparing it to the peripheral characters in Silence of the Lambs, that's what the story is about Clarice Starling. It is her story. This isn't Clarice's story. She is essentially the Hannibal role in this film. She's the secondary to Hannibal's main. Although she brings us into this world, we do spend the majority of the film with Hannibal.
Yeah.
So I understand why her peripheral characters, they're not given the time of day much like the characters in Silence of the Lambs are, whereas the characters surrounding Hannibal, they are given more time. I would say it's a larger cast of characters in a way.
Because then again, I don't think it's actually about Hannibal either.
So who would you say it was about?
To be honest, I think it's more about the other two supporting characters more. You kind of see it through their eyes more. Like the character of Patsy and Mason Verger. Without them, there would be no plot, really. It's their scheming that kind of causes most of the events to occur. There's a couple of little tendrils of things that could have happened, but it's down to Mason Verger and obviously Patsy connected to that actually bring them together in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's kind of really more about them, and especially when you get to the Florence stuff, it's all told from Patsy's perspective. He's watching Hannibal. You're not really following Hannibal that much.
Well, you're following Hannibal in a voyeur sense.
Yeah.
Patsy is our world into Hannibal. But we're seeing kind of like Patsy's descent as well, much like him coming to imitate his ancestor as well by his denouement.
Yeah.
But I would say that it does give us more of Hannibal than any of the films have previously. It gives us more insight into his character and for the first time really allows us to see how he lives.
Yeah.
Which is something that I know that the TV show then went to explore as well. I would say that of all of the films in the Hannibal series, Hannibal is the one that the TV show has taken most of its inspiration from. Not just in terms of the look and the sound, but in terms of its exploration of the character as well.
Yeah.
There's a deliciousness to him.
And the cooking.
And yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I can see where you're coming from. I certainly see where you're coming from in regards to the comparison to Silence of the Lambs. I can certainly see that, how it does pale in comparison as a thriller. I completely understand because it doesn't have any suspense to it as well. There is no suspense in terms of the story. There's no like central serial killer or anything like that you can.
I don't even think it's that. I think it's like even down to the basic character arcs. I don't feel there's enough going on. Even in Hannibal's side, I feel like there is a change, but I just don't think there's enough going on, to be honest, with the characters. I know, like you're saying before, how he wouldn't have cut off his hand before, but I'm just like, changing the ending completely alters everything because it's so faithful up until that point. The whole preamble is leading up to something that's not there anymore. And so you generally tend to fall back on the other elements that are just more exciting. Like, I would probably say for me, that Mason Verger is a lot more compelling a character than Hannibal in this film compared to how he is in Silence of the Lambs. There's a lot more depth there than there is with Hannibal in this one. Because I feel like at this time, I remember when it came out, a lot of people started to think that Hannibal was a more of a cartoon character coming out of this, and that his portrayals in Hannibal and Red Dragon are not as lauded as they are in the earlier film.
Yeah, I mean, in that regard, I know that a lot of people have often leaned on Brian Cox as the pinnacle of Hannibal Lecter, as the overlooked champion of the character. But for me, I mean, like you say, Mason Verger is a fantastic character, absolutely amazing. He is one of the linchpins of the film that makes it for myself. But also, he is an extension of Hannibal. He is Hannibal's monster. Insight into Mason Verger, into what he has become, is what Hannibal has made him. It's more insight into that character. I mean, in the previous films, we see some of it in terms of the effect that Hannibal has had on Will Graham in terms of the lasting scars, but we've never seen the monstrous version of what he's left behind. I mean, I agree. I think Mason Verger is a fantastic character, but I do think by extension, he is an exploration of Hannibal himself, what he's created. Hannibal's monster.
Yeah.
And I think that this film, in general, is far more cartoonish than any film that has come before it. But that's part of the appeal for me, personally. I know that that's exactly what a lot of people are turned off by.
I think what it does, though, is I think it makes the character of Lecter himself far less scary, because he is genuinely frightening in the earlier films.
Yeah.
Even the Brian Cox one, there's a level of menace around. And I just feel, although they play on completely different sides of Lecter here, but it definitely robs of its menace. It becomes something completely different.
Yeah, for me, it's less menace and more intrigue when it comes to the character.
Yeah,
there is a moment which I always find chilling with Hannibal Lecter, and it's just simply the moment where he waves from the balcony.
Yeah.
And Mason Verger says, "Is that a wave goodbye or a wave hello?" And that's always a moment in terms of Hannibal Lecter as a character that it recaptures that little bit of the chillingness, just because I always think it feels almost real.
I think it's also because it gives it a little bit of mystery, because I know on that bit they're asking, is he waving goodbye or is he saying hello? And there's that little bit of mystery there, which I feel is because you're delving so much into Hannibal and his personal life and his home life, that it's like, I don't know, it's like watching Darth Vader go to the toilet. It's that kind of thing where it kind of is sort of slightly robbed of his gravitas, because you obviously, they are wholeheartedly delving into that character's home life. So inevitably you're going to sort of rob the character of some sort of internal mystery, because you kind of know what makes him tick a bit more.
Oh, if you think that this film robs him of his internal mystery, you need to see Hannibal Rising, because I know that Hannibal, in terms of the actual book, when I read it, I did notice that there were parts of it that were lesser in quality than the previous books in terms of the quality of the writing. Hannibal Rising is such a step down for Thomas Harris, even from that point. That it was like reading it's so short and it's written in such a way that it's almost like he skipped the book writing phase and just jumped straight to the script.
Oh, he did. I mean, Hannibal Rising, if you read about the creation of that film, and I say it as that film because, to be honest, the book's a novelization of the screenplay because they're written at the same time, you can completely blame Dino De Laurentiis for that, because apparently what happened with that was because this film and Red Dragon had done so well, and his option for the rights to the character was coming up, he wanted to do a prequel. And he basically said to Thomas Harris, would you write me a prequel, screenplay or book? And he said no, because he didn't have any ideas for one.
Yeah.
But basically, Dino De Laurentiis gave him an ultimatum to say that you do this now, or I will do this now with somebody else.
Yeah, that sounds like Dino.
To the point where Thomas Harris goes, okay, I might have an idea. And it was very hastily put together, which is why it's like it is. And that's why the book came out literally about 3 months before the film, which was... it's not great.
And you can see there's no heart, there's no soul, there's no talent. No. It's just purely like an exercise. That is.
Yeah, so, I mean, you can't really blame Thomas Harris for that, because he was literally given an ultimatum. If he didn't do it, then somebody else would. And... yeah, it's just down to Dino De Laurentiis wanting to extend his option.
Yeah, that does sound like Dino. I mean,
it's the contractual obligation film.
He passed on Silence of the Lambs after Manhunter underperformed, I remember reading.
Yeah, he basically just gave it to Orion for free.
Yeah.
Which was nice of him. Probably the only nice thing that he's done in that time period. I watched the Charles de la Zarica documentary.
Hey, me too. Last night, yeah, it's great.
I watched it today because I hadn't seen it for a while, and yeah, so it's a solid early 2000s documentary. You can kind of see the seeds being sown for the sort of longer form documentaries that they do later on.
I think it's his first documentary with Ridley Scott as well, Hannibal.
Yeah, it's Dino De Laurentiis always cracks me up anyway.
He's great, isn't he?
It's funny. I feel like he's this like proper old school film mogul, but he doesn't seem to have much clue what he's doing.
Yeah,
it feels like everyone else is doing things for him. He's obviously good with the chat and getting people to do stuff, but then he leaves it to Martha to do everything else. But yeah, he's just his mannerisms as well. Even the way he says Hannibal, it's like Hannibal.
Everything is really theatrical with him.
It's Anthony, you know, do Hannibal. You know, it's brilliant, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, his way completely explains some of his movies.
I was about to say, I think Hannibal is a film that fits him to a T.
Yeah.
I always think of Ridley Scott's films, Hannibal is a very Ridley Scott film as well. I mean, I know he's the director.
Yeah, I was going to say as well before, Hannibal is the first in a very long string of consecutive productions for Ridley Scott. This is where his prolific period really starts.
Yeah.
And obviously Gladiator is the film that set that off.
Yeah.
But this is the first film where he basically has no break going from one film to another, because if you look at his earlier filmography, there's gaps of a year or two or three, whereas here you're starting to get a film coming out every year, sometimes 2 films a year. Because I know Black Hawk Down came out at the end of the year, the beginning of the year. So this is the start of a long streak.
This is perhaps going to bring the conversation down a notch, but I think something has to say about it in regards to him losing a parent at the time that Hannibal came out. Yeah, I do remember that he lost his mother, I think, just as Hannibal came out. He seems to me to be the type of character that throws himself into his work, because especially if we compare it as well to when Tony Scott unfortunately passed away, all of a sudden as well, Ridley Scott's in the middle of another one of his run-through films. He's just doing film after film after film. I remember him saying in an interview he likes 4 weeks off, like a 4-week holiday, and then he wants to be working on the next film.
That's fair enough. But yeah, there's a hell of a lot of crossover, because obviously for this film, he was doing all the prep during the post in Gladiator.
Yeah.
I mean, this is probably a good time to talk about the fact that literally everybody, apart from Anthony Hopkins, that was involved in Silence of the Lambs, all
said
of them passed on this. All of them said no. It was quite, and it's obviously down to what was going on in the book as well, because I think everyone was kind of up for it until the book came out.
Yeah.
And everyone went, oh, this is what it's going to. We don't want to do this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in many ways, I completely understand, because, as mentioned, it is a very sharp departure from Silence of the Lambs in terms of, it's not just like, oh, they're taking some elements of Silence of the Lambs and expanding on it further or taking it somewhere. It's like a quite sharp left turn, much in the same way as Alien 3 is to Aliens. It's like, you know what? Fuck it. We're going to do something completely different. But it's also stylistically completely different. In terms of what it builds towards, on the page as well, it builds towards this almost like fantasy ending with them running away together, which is absurd, but I guess it kind of works for the book, but it's so bizarre.
Yeah, and the dug up bones and the hypnotism and everything.
Exactly, yeah. I can see why so many of them bolt at the idea of this. And I mean, I always appreciate, it's going to sound bad, I always appreciate balls on a film. And I think Hannibal is a film that has balls on it, because it is a vast departure when so many people were expecting and wanting more of Silence of the Lambs. But I think that's the right choice to make as well, to make it this, as I've mentioned, for me, it's a dark romance. And it does work for me. I understand it doesn't work for you. It does work for me as this kind of dark fairy tale romance, because it's almost like it's got an almost dream or nightmare quality to it as well.
I just feel like it needed a few more passes to bring it together a bit more. I just feel like the characters needed to come together more.
Yeah.
It feels very reaching, especially between sort of the half hour to 70-minute mark when they're trying to cut back to Clarice, and you can kind of tell that she's just on the sidelines at that point, and you're really interested in what's going on with Hannibal and Patsy and everything else in Florence.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah,
and the stuff in Washington is very dull in comparison.
Yeah, it is,
and it's very broad strokes as well. Because I wrote down in my notes, I was like, I kind of like the character of Krendler, but in comparison to some of the other characters that they've had in the past, I think he's painted it a little bit too broad for that to work. I feel like to have made that horror work a bit better, he needed to be a bit more 3D, because such a shit throughout the whole thing. When he gets his brains eaten, it's like, I'm not asked. Whereas if he was a slightly more sympathetic character, it would be a lot more horrific, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the issue with that scene in particular, is that a decision was made at some point that they didn't want to make that character sympathetic whatsoever because of the horror that was awaiting him at the end. That it would have been, because that is a scene that already did tip audiences. That was a scene that left many people repulsed, I know, by looking at the reviews and looking at the audience reactions to that scene. And I think they were too afraid of making that character anywhere sympathetic because it was already repulsive as it is.
Yeah.
I do agree with you that they do lean into it way too hard.
Yeah.
There's a nervousness to their dealing with that character because they don't want to paint any sides to him because of what's awaiting him.
In a way, I mean, every time I watch that scene now, it kind of feels quite tame to me.
Oh, I'm still repulsed by it. Still gets right under my skin.
I like that it's played so lightly because it's kind of humorous at the same time, but I just feel like, considering what they can do now, I reckon they could have probably pushed it a bit further, like if they'd made it now.
Oh, most certainly. And I will say, spoilers for Hannibal the TV series for the next minute or so. But they actually do exactly that scene in the Hannibal TV show in the 3rd season, which is very much a recreation of the whole Florence section of the book. The first half of that series is set in Florence, with Will Graham travelling to Florence to capture Hannibal.
Yeah, it's all a bit of a mix-up because it's kind of like Hannibal, then it's Red Dragon, the second half.
They make it work because they've clearly planned it all out in advance.
Yeah.
But season 3 is essentially 2 seasons that they said. They had 2 seasons that Brian Fuller wanted to do, but he knew he only had 1 season left before it was going to be axed. So we fit them together and it works as well. But the Crendel of Fate of having his skull removed is actually then transported to Will Graham, which makes it far more horrific, because Will Graham is a very sympathetic character as it is, and he's the one who ends up with the skull being removed scene, and it does really leave an impression. But the TV series very much is set up for that style. It's very overblown, it's very theatric, it's very operatic. Whereas in the Hannibal series, Hannibal is the only film with any sense of that whatsoever, because Hannibal the book is the only one with any sense of that as well. So I completely understand why it's a tonal change as well.
I would say that with the possible exception of the breakout in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
You know, when he's wearing somebody else's face and there's the whole hanging up on the bars and stuff like that.
That is right.
That's kind of the precursor of that scene.
Yeah, I suppose essentially that scene is what this film is drawn out.
Yeah, because even before Hannibal came out, everyone always talked about that scene in Silence of the Lambs, the one where he's wearing someone else's face. I always remember my dad talking about that one. And yeah, this is kind of almost like the follow-up of that kind of thing.
But I do agree with you as well. I will say straight up that scene is probably the most effective Hannibal scene for me.
Yeah. Although, actually, it was funny watching it last night. I think the preamble of that, again, robs it of a bit of mystery, because me and Jess were watching it last night, and there's the little preamble where he's buying like cooking stuff and then he's getting like the saw from the hospital and things like that.
Oh no, I'm referring to Silence of the Lambs.
Oh right, okay.
Sorry, my mistake. I think the scene in which he escapes from wherever he escapes from, and he hangs that gentleman up and takes his face and all that.
Yeah.
That's the pinnacle for Hannibal Lecter for me. That's him at his most terrifying. And Hannibal never reaches that point. It reaches it in terms of its repulsiveness. There's a certain repulsiveness to the acts that he undertakes in Hannibal, but he's never as scary as he is in Silence of the Lambs. And I completely do agree with you. I don't think they ever really intend to make him all that terrifying in Hannibal, because they are exploring it as I keep going back to it, this kind of like dark romance, dark fantasy thing. But I do agree that in terms of him at his most terrifying, it is in Silence of the Lambs. It is that scene. Has to be.
And again, like I was saying before, robbing the mystery and the tension, I think, as well, because you see him buying the cookware and getting the saw. Whereas, for example, like in that scene we've just been talking about, you don't really get any kind of inkling of what he's going to do or what he's doing.
Yeah.
When it does come to it, it's a more of a shock. Whereas I feel like, to be honest, like if they re-edited that film now, I would take those scenes out.
Yeah.
And just have it so it comes out of complete nowhere.
I do agree with you. I think we do see a scene too many of Hannibal in that regard.
Yeah.
And going back to something that you did mention earlier as well, just to meet you on another point, one thing that you did mention is during the Florence scenes, I will agree that is where Clarice Starling in this film is at her weakest. because that's the part of the film where they've got nothing for her to do. It's all Hannibal's film at that point. And all we are doing with Clarice Starling is checking in just to make sure that the audience is still aware that she is there and something's still going to happen later on down the line. Doesn't actually start to build up any suspense between the characters meeting again until after Patsy's death.
Yeah, I think it also doesn't, well, it does help the film, but it doesn't help her that Giancarlo Giannini does a damn fine job of being the surrogate lead at that point in the film.
This film made me a fan of him. So I love that character.
They made a really good choice with that actor to be that character because he probably has as much screen time as Clarice in the movie. I mean, even though his part's kind of done by about the 80-minute mark, he's in a good hour of the film.
And he's a fully fleshed out character as well with dimensions to him. You've got this corrupt cop element to him as well. And also a failed corrupt cop who's dealing with that. Whilst also holding the burden of his kind of ancestral guilt in a city that remembers.
Yeah, I feel like they really nailed that character in a way that I don't feel they nailed Clarice's character at all. I don't feel she's got much depth. The depth has just gone from that character, where it's all been like spent on Patsy and some of these other characters who I'd rather be watching.
I do agree with you in that Clarice is not as interesting as a character, but as I mentioned, for me, she is the Dante Alighieri character. She is the one that's observing this, through whom we see most of this torment. And she's simply walking through hell, and Hannibal is her ultimate evil. Whereas Hannibal sees her as something else entirely.
Yeah, I just wish she'd been part of the action a bit more, because even as that, I don't feel there's enough material there to really justify that, because she's only walking through hell for about 20 minutes. The actual film time, being like sort of 2 hours, 5 minutes. I just don't feel there's enough connective tissue. I feel like the adaptation of this book, it needed something else. They may have needed to have been a bit more liberal with how it went down and how it was structured and which characters were where to really have made it pop. Because I know I'm coming quite hard on it as a follow-up to Silence of the Lambs, but at the same time, I don't want it to be a repeat of Silence of the Lambs. I appreciate that it's doing something different. Yeah, but it does feel like a film that is less than the sum of its parts, because some of those parts are amazing. Like, I love all the stuff in Florence, love Giancarlo Giannini, love a lot of what Lecter's doing and what he's saying, love, obviously, all the sort of operatic parts of it, love the end scene, even though it's probably not as good as it should be. All the Mason Verger stuff.
Yeah, I don't think we've spoken about Mason Verger enough as well.
Even the stuff with Barney at the beginning is great.
It's such a pleasure to see him in this character, in this role, but give him more to do. I think this is the film where he's given the most to do as a character as well.
Yeah. Again, I just don't feel like it doesn't flow as well as it should do, I don't think.
I will agree with you that I feel like the flow of the piece is disjointed. The chapters are clear. It works in very clear sections. Silence of the Lambs feels like it's a whole. Every scene rolls into the next and it's rolling towards something.
Yeah, because I think a big thing that's missing, especially the thing that sets the film off, is the why, and why now. That's one of the big things that bothers me, because I get that Hannibal wants to come out of retirement and all that, but why now? Why at this moment?
Because she's a bird with a broken wing. And that's what I meant to say as well, as in terms of Clarice's hell. It's not just the hell in which Hannibal kind of exacts onto her with all of the various deaths and stuff that happen in this film, but also just in terms of what's happening in her personal life with her work as well.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think they emotionally make enough of that as well.
That may be the reason why that is, because I feel that part of the film is easily the weakest part of the film.
Yeah.
There's not much interesting that's going on in those sections.
I mean, we are getting towards the end of the podcast now, so I just want to bring up a few things as well for us to discuss. One thing that I did want to mention as well is I can't really speak about Hannibal and not mention the score as well by Hans Zimmer. I do feel like this is Hans Zimmer's best score, and a couple of influences that I always pick up on in this film. It draws from one of my favourite romantic pieces, which is Symphony No. 5 by Gustav Mahler, but it has a lot of romantic era references throughout the score. Also, there's a heavy nod to the Suspiria score as well in the film.
Yeah.
But I do feel like the film does draw from Argento in terms of the violence. And it's not just the Italian setting as well, which obviously makes any film feel Argento when it's about a serial killer going about eating and murdering people. But I also, again, mentioned that dreamlike quality to the film as well. I feel like that's Argento-ish. I feel like Hannibal exists in an Argento film and Clarice Starling exists in a procedural drama.
Yeah.
And the Argento stuff works more.
Yeah. I'm always a bit mixed on the score, to be honest.
Oh, are you?
I think partly because a lot of it's not his own work. You know, like the opera's not his.
Vide Call Me In being the big one by Patrick Doyle, is it? Not
Patrick Cassidy.
Patrick Cassidy, that's it. I was getting mixed up with Patrick Doyle.
I think it's because it kind of bothers me in the promotional material. In the documentary, they basically make it out like he wrote it.
Yes.
Which I think is a bit dishonest. Because actually, when you look at the credits, he's not credited with writing it at all.
No, and there's a great piece of the documentary that is all about Hans Zimmer mixing it. And
yeah.
They really positions him as being the creator of this piece.
Because even earlier on in the documentary, when they're actually filming the sequence that it's used for, Martha's going on about that they needed that section first. I'm not sure whether it's just because he wasn't available, because he'd only been on the film 2 weeks at that point, where he had to get somebody else to do it. She mentions that, him and his friend Patrick Cassidy wrote this, and I was like...
That's the only mention he gets as well. That's the only mention he gets.
Yeah, when he actually goes to the credit, it's like, And I think also as well, like, so much of the score is based on the Blue Danube. All the Mason Verger stuff is Blue Danube.
Well, the Mason Verger stuff is, then there's the Gustav Mahler stuff, and then there's the Let My Home Be My Gallows, which is something else. But I'd say if you listen to the score, there's only the one track that is the Blue Danube stuff, but it's like a perversion of the Blue Danube. It becomes something much darker and drawn out.
Yeah. For me, I think it's a perfectly competent score, and it does its job because I don't notice it so much in that way, which is what all good scores should do. But my favourite part is the bit that's not written by him.
I'd say that Vide Call Me In is the one that's going to get the bums in the seats if we do talk about scores in that way. But I don't know, I do think there are more gems to that score. Like, as I say, there's a track called Let My Home Be My Gallows. But I actually feel like, for me, this is my favourite Hans Zimmer score, but this is also Hans Zimmer at his best when he's drawing from more classical influences. Because I know for a while he did just lose himself in sound design.
Yeah, I feel like, this is Hans Zimmer as his most sort of lyrical.
Yeah.
But it never stands out to me, but that's kind of the point, I suppose.
Yeah.
Really. It's kind of very well integrated into the film.
I will say it's absolutely worth listening to independent from the film itself as well.
Yeah, I will have a listen to it again because I feel like the bits that only really come through, like that sort of scream out to you, are the opera bits.
Yeah.
And the Blue Danube bits, but then everything else is because it's quite subtle at times that, you're not really paying attention.
It marries with the visuals perfectly as well in terms of Ridley Scott's style with that film. It never really drives the emotion of a scene, but it does its job wonderfully for me.
I don't know why I'm criticising it so much because it's doing its job what it's supposed to be doing. You know, as somebody who's written music for film before, it's doing exactly what it should be doing. To be honest, I think it's more the sort of slight dishonesty in the documentary that's bothering me more than anything else, but that's just early 2000s documentaries.
There's always been a minor issue with Hans Zimmer in regards to that, is that he does give a platform for a lot of composers to come through the ranks and start getting a foot in the industry, but it does require for them to sign away a lot of their music to his name, because you have to approach Hans Zimmer's name as a brand, as a company name, not as an individual's name whenever you see his name on a film score, because there are a lot of people that work under Hans Zimmer that are writing the scores for his music. And I do feel like a lot of composers that do sign on to that know what they're getting into, but there is a dishonesty at work from like a common person's perspective, because that's never let into. The audience are never let into that, really. You only let into it if you do your research.
Yeah.
There is a dishonesty there for Hans Zimmer. I do really like his music. I've been to see him a few times and he puts on a great show. But I always thought there is a touch of a dishonesty at work in terms of the way that he does work with his team.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure there's at least one Klaus Badalt cue in there as well. I'm pretty sure there's one credited at the end.
So, all that said, what would your ranking be of the Lecter films, do you think?
It's difficult. It's a strange one because I quite like Manhunter up until the last act.
Yeah.
I mean, Red Dragon is basically a shot-for-shot recreation of Manhunter. If you watch them back-to-back, some of the shots are exactly the same. But the one thing that Red Dragon has on its side is that it uses the ending of the book, which is a bit more of a twist. Whereas in Manhunter, the ending's very oddly straightforward, which I don't like. I remember when I first watched that film, I was like, what? They didn't use that part? They just go in, get the guy, the end. It's very bizarre how it ends, to be honest, because everything else going up to it is so good.
Yeah, if I'm absolutely honest about Manhunter, is that I watched it when I was very young. I watched it when I was about 11 or 12. there are only a couple of scenes that really left a huge impression on me, and I've never seen it again since. It's been one of those films on my list that I've wanted to go back to, but for one reason or another, I haven't. And one is, I do remember the ending, but also I remember as well that the Freddie Lunz, or whatever his name is, being put in the wheelchair and wheeled out on the car park is far more horrifying in Manhunter than it is in Red Dragon.
Yeah, it's basically, Manhunter is Red Dragon done Miami Vice style.
Yes.
It's very much 80s Michael Mann.
Yeah.
And it's strange how Red Dragon, the 2002 film, cribs so much of it in terms of its shot composition, especially when it goes down to how Will dissects the crime scenes. Those scenes are basically identical, but done in the sort of Silence of the Lambs style. So it's kind of cribbing from both those films.
Yeah.
So it's strange because I can't really do my ranking because I haven't seen Red Dragon for quite a long time. So my opinion on it may completely change when I watch it again.
I watched it for the first time after having seen, and it was the last film that I watched as well, because I watched Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal. And I also watched a few episodes of the TV series as well, just to reacquaint myself with a few episodes of that. And then I watched Red Dragon again, and it was the last film on that list. And after doing that, it came across as, I'd always liked it. I'd always thought it wasn't brilliant, but it was competent, and it was well done for a Brett Ratner film, because Brett Ratner isn't somebody that has a personality. He more apes other people's personalities, and he normally does a competent job of it, like X-Men 3 in terms of the look and structure of that film. It looks like part of Bryan Singer's canon, and Red Dragon feels like it's part of the Silence of the Lambs universe as well in terms of the continuity. But watching it again now, it just felt so soulless and plodding.
Yeah.
I think what you actually mentioned about Hannibal is how I felt about Red Dragon is I felt like it lacked a purpose. And I do feel like that purpose is just simply because this had all been done previously. It's an exercise, really. It's just to fill that gap in the Anthony Hopkins Hannibal trilogy pack.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a scratching an itch for Dino De Laurentiis as well, because I know he's quoted about Manhunter by saying, Manhunter no good. It is not Red Dragon. Yeah, it is definitely an obligation film.
Yeah.
So I'll have to watch it again because I'll probably be more critical on it. I mean, to be honest, the only film that in the series which is completely perfect is Silence of the Lambs anyway.
Yeah, Silence of the Lambs is one of my, I would say, at least top 20 films. I love it and can watch it at any time.
I think as music goes, I think the is it Howard Shore?
Howard Shore, yeah.
Yeah, I think his score is great.
Wonderful score. To be honest, I do feel like that series, the Anthony Hopkins Hannibal films, do have rather good scores. I actually am quite fond of Danny Elfman's Red Dragon score as well. I think it has a few really fantastic cues. It's a little bit more characterless in the middle. Like there are a few themes that are just there to fill space. But I do think it has a few real prominent themes that are very listenable.
Yeah, so I suppose... No, I can't rank them. I suppose it just is Silence of the Lambs at the top and then everything else down the bottom.
Yeah.
I can't rank them because I've not seen Manhunter for a long time and I haven't seen Red Dragon for a long time. So
You've never seen Hannibal Rising?
I've got it on DVD somewhere though. I've never had the inkling to go and watch it.
I watched, I think, around 2/3 of it and turned it off. I'd read the book and I'd seen 2/3 of the film and it was just horrendous.
Yeah.
It's definitely not worth watching. It definitely ruins the mystery behind the character.
I think it's got 16% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Oh, yeah. Looking at Hannibal as well, I'm always, when I see the Rotten Tomatoes score as well as being 39%, I'm like, oh, that's far too low. That is far too low. I know the audience score is more like 69%, 69, but...
Yeah. I can understand why, though, because I feel like for people expecting a follow-up to Silence of the Lambs, it's not hitting those beats at all.
Yeah.
So I think on a sort of, a quick reaction,
yes,
which obviously all film reviews are when they're written... That's kind of the problem with film reviews in a nutshell, is that they're always based on face value.
Yes, and it never really gives the critic any time to digest the film or approach it later on down the line. If say some films become more prescient kind of thing and they take on a whole new meaning as the world changes around us as well. And films can sit differently as well. They can get better over time or worse over time. I don't think Rotten Tomatoes allows for those type of changes in attitude. It's like, my issue with Rotten Tomatoes isn't critics are bad, as so many people out there seem to be pushing these days. The critics are wrong as being the thing. But I think it kind of reduces critics' voices to a binary option of, well, it reduces them to just simply saying that a film is either good or bad, that binary option. But it also then freezes their opinion in time. and it's unchanged them forever.
To be honest, I feel like what they should really be doing, because I know they've actually been downplaying it more recently, is the average rating.
Yes, they have. They really have.
Which is much more indicative of the actual film's quality.
Yeah.
Because a film can have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, but still have an average rating of like 6.57 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not brilliant. It's kind of like average.
So many blockbuster films seem to get those type of ratings as well.
Whereas some genuinely great films, which can actually be polarizing because of their, their subject material and how they approach things, can have a much lower percentage, but their average rating is much higher.
Yeah.
Which I just find a very odd thing. And and they seem to be downplaying that more so. Like if you look at the actual, like the top of the screen, like it's de-emphasized so much now.
Yeah.
That it's just about the percentage, which is bizarre. So yeah, it kind of really clouds your judgment when you look at the rating versus the film as well.
Yeah.
Because I'd say this film's probably at least a 6 out of 10 for me.
Yeah.
Because I'd say, I feel like I've come down very hard on it, but the individual elements in there I really love and I think are executed very well. I just feel like certain other elements in it are weaker and the whole thing doesn't quite merge together successfully.
I do completely as well respect your opinion in that regard. I know it's very rare that we ever come on different sides of the show in terms of approaching films, and this has certainly been one of those examples. But I've quite enjoyed this. I've quite enjoyed the back and forth and the challenging each other on the opinion in a very civilized manner. People can have these slightly differing opinions and still discuss that in a civilized manner. There is space for that. So I guess we've already spoke about it as well throughout the episode, but this is the point now where I just ask, is Hannibal a film that you would recommend? And what are your final thoughts, really? Your final words?
Yeah. Final thoughts, really, because we haven't really talked about it enough, is Gary Oldman's performance in the film, which is nothing short of spectacular and
transformative.
I mean, the fact that when it came out, he wasn't credited at all in the film. I know they put his credit back in the home video,
but that was something that he pushed as well as an idea.
Well, it sounded like there was a bit of a contention because I think when he was originally approached, he wanted third billing.
Oh, did he? Oh, right.
They wouldn't give it to him, so he was out of the film for a while. But then when he came back and reconsidered, he was like, actually, I want to go the complete opposite way and not be credited at all because I just want to be completely immersed in this. Oh, wow. So it's almost like if I can't have that, then I'm going to do this thing instead.
I think the film works better for that decision, though.
Yeah.
It's one of those strange decisions where the marketing actually aids the film in a way, because I remember when I first saw it, I had no idea that was Gary Oldman.
No.
And even the pictures that you see of him and the little flashback is done in such a way that you only ever really get a glimpse of him. You never really get to see that it is Gary Oldman. And it was long after the film came out that I came to realize it was him. What a transformative, and not just physically as well, but his voice and the few mannerisms that he gets without really moving any part of his body are amazing. It is a transformative character for him. It really is.
I think it's a testament as well for when they recreated the character for the TV show. It's done verbatim.
Yes.
It's one of the only things really in the show, because I've seen quite a few bits of it, like that's basically done exactly the same.
Yes, it is. It is straight down to the
voice. It's so iconic and it's so definitive of that character that they just basically had to just recreate it. Yeah, I mean, one of my favourite parts of the film, in a way, is his demise when Lecter coerces Cordell to basically take the brakes off his wheelchair, because there's no hesitation at all.
I know, yeah, Cordell is like, yeet! Fucked him off.
I'm done with this. It's just a wonderful, wonderful moment in the film, actually. I do like that pig sequence, actually.
Yeah.
Because it's built up over quite a long period of time as well.
Yeah, it's got a real nasty payoff, and I very much enjoy that.
Yeah, so I do enjoy all those parts of the film. I think it's just the way they've laced Clarice throughout this that really doesn't quite work. And there's little things as well that bother me as well. Like at the start, what she's wearing during the sort of stakeout sequence is the most obvious FBI costume I've ever seen.
She should have been wearing a t-shirt that just said in white letters, "Cop."
Yeah.
Because it is so obvious that everybody there at that market is a cop.
And I think it's kind of indicative to how she's slightly mistreated in the film, because it's kind of, I suppose it's a bit like when people write Ripley in Alien as that kind of tough as nails sort of thing, and they don't, like Sigourney Weaver always hated that people writing her like that because that's not the character that she was.
No.
And I feel like Clarice has been dealt with this kind of similar brush, and it's kind of robbed the character of any kind of nuance.
I know the film starts with her only male figure that is actually nice to her in the entire film, other than, could be argued, Hannibal, is killed in the opening of the film. Every person that she interacts with from that point, every man that she interacts with, is just a bastard. And that's it. That's it for her character. That's it. That's like the depth of it. And she is unchanging throughout that whole section. She's just, this is the world I live in. All men are bastards. And I've lost my only good spark in this world. But I do think like they go too hard into that. I appreciate where they're going from and what they're setting up about that world and what they're saying. I do feel like there are certain environments and work environments where that exists for women in the workplace. But they kind of lean into it so heavy it becomes a cartoon character, especially as we mentioned for Paul Krendler. They don't give him any dimensions whatsoever.
No.
It's not so much that they're going with that angle of that the men in this environment are bad to her because she's a woman. But also, if they were a little bit more subtle about it and a little bit more... Because men that present themselves as bastards in those environments are not always overtly so. It can be slyer and more manipulative and that type of way. And I think it would have been better if Paul Krendler was more of a manipulative kind of character, more of a snivelling, weaselly kind of thing, but presents himself as nicer to her, where he's kind of trying to pull the rug out under her feet behind her back.
I think the word is duplicitous.
Duplicitous, thank you very much. Yes, that's exactly the type of character it needs, because it plays all the male characters as one role, and that's just, they're all bastards. Flat bastards. That's it. There's no
flat bastards.
Flat bastards. And I think it just needed a little bit more fleshing out in that regard in terms of those characters. And if they had done that, I think the Clarice stuff would have worked better, because it would have given her more to overcome and get around and navigate through these choppy waters of the FBI.
Yeah, it just doesn't pop. It just feels too cliched.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest of the film doesn't feel like that. So it stands out more, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, I think the other note I just wanted to say that I love Paul's PK hat during the brain scene. I love that it has PK written on it.
What's that a reference to?
Paul Krendler.
Oh, Paul Krendler. Oh my God, I didn't even notice. He's got an initialed hat.
It's just quite funny that he's wearing that hat, because it kind of, at that point in the film, it really plays into the kind of childlike state that he's gotten himself into, obviously because of his skull being drilled into.
Okay, so we're getting towards the end of this now, but I just want to as well just give my final thoughts on the film is, it's certainly a film that has flaws, and that's evident today is what we've discussed through, but it's still a film that I very much love. It's still a film that I respond to. I will say that the main reason that I do respond to it is at a time when we were inundated with Silence of the Lambs ripoffs, especially because 7 had come out afterwards as well, and that just kind of reinvigorated that market for more of those type of films. Hannibal comes out and it is something completely different. I very much enjoy that. I enjoy that type of film, and I kind of enjoy the dark fantasy, nightmarish, dreamlike quality that it has that leans into Argento. I love all the Florence stuff. And although it is weaker around Clarice Starling, I do like the coming together at the end as well. So for me, it's definitely a very worthy film, something of a misunderstood film because of what has come before Hannibal as a film. But at the same time, I do completely understand the negative reaction to the film because of that left turn it does make.
Yeah.
So I think it has been misunderstood, but I think later on down the line, some people may come back around to it, especially with the TV show Hannibal coming out and the type of fantastical horror elements that does have. I think that may sway people on Hannibal, considering that its influences really are in that film more than any other film in the Hannibal series.
Yeah.
All that said, I completely understand it isn't a film without its flaws, most certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend people watching it, and because there's some, just for the Florence stuff and the Gary Oldman performance, but I would say don't expect it to be wholly satisfying, just because it kind of only catches fire in fits and starts at times.
Well, it certainly has been a pleasure today. It's always good, as I mentioned earlier, to come onto different sides of the spectrum when it comes to an opinion. One of the few times we have, and I think we've put our cases across well. We might even put it to a public vote following this episode, see what people think. So have a look on our Twitter
page.
Vote for me. So join us next week when we'll be watching Fire Walk with me and discussing that on the podcast. I will say this is a film I've never seen before. I've seen lots of David Lynch films, but I've never seen Fire Walk with me. This shall be fun. So thanks for listening. I've been Gareth Green.
And I've been Cordell.
And goodbye.